welcome back to the studio. Today we're going to be working on quilting one of the quilt tops that I did for Applique Elementz. It was probably several months ago that I actually did this. It was back of the quilt pattern was called Blank Slate, but what I put on it was Applique Elementz Gnome for the holidays. And the Applique Elements are laser cut and pre-fused appliques. They already have the fabric selected, so all you have to do is peel, place, and press. So I have that quilt top finished, and I had looked through some of the quilting patterns to see what I wanted to use. Now there actually is a Christmas gnome or holiday gnome quilting pattern, and I will show you that here. I could have used that on there, but I felt like it might be a little bit redundant. If I was just doing an overall fabric that had printed gnomes on it, I might have used that. But I wanted something with stars, some kind of a star in it, just to kind of give me the idea of a winter starry night. So what I chose was Jessica's Twinkle. It's an 11-inch high design, and it's basically a stars connected by a little swooping arc that connects the design across the edge to edge. But if you know me, you know that I like to try different things. And what I could have done was simply use the Superior Mono Poly Clear, and that would have just given you the texture on the quilt without any color. And I'm not a real big fan of always using the mono poly, so it is almost a pure white background on the whole quilt, so I could have chosen white also, but that seemed a little bit safe also. So what I am going to do, I think I've got 6 rows that are going to sew out on the edge-to-edge design. I'm going to start at the top with the darkest blue, and I'm going to work my way down to the lightest blue as it gets down towards the bottom of where the gnomes and writing are. So each time I advance the row, I will have to change the thread, and we'll see how well I do at remembering that, because it's not something I normally do. But I'm going to go ahead and bring you in a little bit closer just so you can see my color choices for the quilt. But before I do that, I'll just say that it's kind of a funny thing that here in the studio, I'm in a quantum state of holiday flux. It could be any given holiday here in the studio, because I film when I have all of the materials and a topic ready. I don't necessarily film things sequentially the way they appear online, because that's just not possible for me. So sometimes I've got Halloween and Christmas going at the same time, Thanksgiving and spring. About the only way to tell what the actual season is here in the studio is by how many layers I have on. So right now it's pretty warm, but I am still working on winter, getting quilts ready for the winter holiday. So I'm going to bring you in and show you what these threads look like, and see if you like it. If not, we'll wait and save your judgment till the end. These are the 6 colors that I'm going to be using. These are Isacord thread, because that's what I have in the studio. And blue seems to be one of those colors that there's always a huge selection or range in. So what I've chosen is a value of darkest to lightest. And this darkest one here is only going to appear in a few components of the stars at the very top. Most of it will be cut off, and then we'll switch sequentially as we go down. And I may make a change down here and go all the way to pure white. I'm not convinced these two are in the right order, but I'm going to go ahead and get the design loaded and the size of the quilt loaded so we can get the IntelliQuilter working while I figure these last 2 out. I don't know if you can see, if you can remember this. I'll pop up a picture so you can see what the design looked like for both the pattern and the applique. But you can see there's a lot of white on here, so that blue, the darker blue, is really going to pop at the top part of this, but it's going to fade as it goes down. And I chose blue because there's already a lot of blue in the quilt. But we're going to go ahead and show you how we load the design onto the instructions for this, and we'll go ahead and get started. What we have here is the main menu for the IntelliQuilter, and what we're going to do first is select Design Sew Quilt, and we're going to start new because this is a new project. Do I want to, I already have a work in progress. It was me just testing this layout for the quilt, so I'm going to go ahead and erase that. And do I want to start the clock? Yes, I'm going to reset the clock. If you were curious, the IntelliQuilter can tell you how long you worked on a particular project, which might be useful for those of you who do billing or working for customers. What type of pattern are we going to use? Today it's going to be a panto, an edge to edge, a continuous line. And I have three options: mark on the quilt, trace on quilt, or enter quilt manually. I've already measured this out. It's 45 wide and it's 60 long, and that is actually maybe 1.5 inches bigger than what the actual quilt is. That way the straight lines sew off of the edge of the quilt where it connects, so I can go ahead and trim that off after I'm finished. And you can see on the rectangle here that I have the representation of the size of the quilt. So I can go ahead and hit finished, and now it's going to ask me to load the design. The design that I have I just loaded onto the machine, so it's under my downloads. And this is it here, Jessica's Twinkle 11. So I hit that for the even rows and for the odd rows, and you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rows of stitching is what I would have if I left it as is. But I want to eliminate the gap between all of these rows. I don't want it to look like typewriters. So I'll hit gap, and then I can just stretch this with my pen or my finger until I get this interlocking the way I want. After I've done that, I'm going to go ahead and hit row height and hit the little keyboard. I know that this design originally was meant to be stitched out at 11 inches, and so I want to keep that representation just for sizing as I do the quilt. And that gives me a basic representation of what the quilt would look like. I could change that completely and make it even smaller. And let's see how many, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I could do that and it would give me an additional row. It just means I'm going to have to roll the quilt up more often. And I think I might actually keep that. I'm going to look at 8 inches and see what it looks like. That's even smaller yet. I think I'm going to go back to 9. And I'm going to just adjust accordingly with my thread colors. I can add or subtract as I need to, but I'm going to go ahead and hit finished. And transition type is continuous. I'm going to accept that. And this is what my whole quilt would look like as I sewed it out. So if I hit sew quilt, panto sequencing, please select the first pattern, which is going to be these very little tops here. And we're going to hit I'm going to alternate the rows so they sew back and forth, left to right. We're going to tie off in between, and we're going to do the whole quilt. And now you can see that the entire quilt is sequenced. It may be hard for you to see, but there's 2 colors of green here. One just they're showing you right to left and left to right. So I'm going to go ahead and get started and sew quilt. Okay, I've hit the start button and we're going to get our first color, which is just going to be a few points of the star on here. So as soon as this one's over, I'm going to have to change the thread color again, and we'll go ahead and go through the progression of all of our colors until we get down to the finish line. I've made my first thread change. I only have 4 little points from my previous blue color. I don't have to roll up the quilt at this point because there's enough space to do this next row. So I'm going to go ahead and hit start. It's going to move to my next start position. And it did a single stitch for me to pull up the thread, which my thread did not pull up. Okay, my thread's pulled up. I'm getting it back to where it was so I can go ahead and hit the start button. And now it's going to go ahead and start with what is actually the second row, but it's really going to only be the first complete row. And at this point we'll be able to see about what size the stars are actually going to finish, which I think they're in proportion to the gnomes, so I think I'm happy. But we can go ahead and let this sew out, and then we'll go ahead and roll up and work on the next color. You can also see up here where the design changes from red to green, shows you where we are at the design. There's a crosshair on the screen that tells you exactly where the needle position is. Okay, we're at the end of the first complete row, so we've done the partial and the complete, and now it's stopped. I'm going to go ahead and roll up the quilt and realign it to get it lined back up for the next row, and then we'll go ahead. I've already changed my thread color because that's the part I'm going to have the hardest time remembering because I don't normally do it. But we're going to go ahead and get it rolled up, and we'll get it started again, and we'll bring you back in. We have the quilt rolled up. The edges are repinned. I'm going to go ahead, I've lined it back up to the end point, and it's brought itself down to the new start. It's the start of row 3. So I'm going to go ahead and hit start. And we can see that it's taking off. It's going to start doing the next row. And at a glance, you can't even tell that I've changed the thread color. But I think once the whole thing is finished, what we're going to get is an ombre effect of the dark blue to the light blue as we progress down the quilt. As I've said before, you have to be really careful when you touch the quilt when it's in progress, because you can move the quilt in batting, but the IntelliQuilter does not know that you've done that, so it's going to sew what it thinks is correct, and you're going to get a glitch in the pattern. So I always have to remind myself not to bump the frame, not to touch the quilt, and to let things go unless I hit the pause button. We are on the beginning of our fourth row. I'm going to hit continue and start. I basted the two edges again just to keep those nice and clean. We are on also our fourth color, so we should be getting down to some lighter shades of blue. And I'm going to go ahead and just let you watch this stitch out a little bit just to show you how it interlocks with the previous row. I've got it so it almost touches the start point of the row ahead of it. And it's sewing out really beautifully. So I'm going to let you watch that for a second, and then we'll go ahead and get the thread changed for another row. We are at the start of row number 5. I am on my 5th thread change. I'm into a lighter powder blue now, and we're getting ready to sew over top of the applique. One of the things I will tell you is you are free to top stitch on those appliques if you choose, but our samples are never top stitched. We do quilt over them, but as long as they were fused properly to begin with, then there shouldn't be any problem with them ever coming up. They are permanent once fused properly. So I'm going to go ahead and quilt over the top of those. And at this point we're in a lighter blue. I'm going to go ahead and hit the start button. And fortunately I was off the quilt because I had it on BSR3, which was my basting function. I just basted the two edges so there wouldn't be any problem with the edge getting lifted up by the hopping foot. But we're back to stitching on the quilt with the powder blue, and I'll let you watch a little bit of that. see now we are top stitching or quilting directly over the applique. I'm just going to go ahead and let that progress all the way across, and we'll get down to our next thread color, which is going to be an even lighter shade of blue. When I'm getting ready to roll up my quilt for the next row, what I try and do is find the part of the design that has not been sewn out yet and that is the highest point. So on this particular thing, the green star point right here is the highest point that I'm going to stitch out in the row that I'm getting ready to do. So I'm going to put my crosshairs right there, and I'm going to drop the needle into the quilt. So now when I roll the quilt up, when the head of the machine goes back far enough that it still has a little bit of play back there, I know that I'm rolled up to the right place, and I can go ahead and raise the needle and then move back to my start position. So I'm going to leave the camera right there, and you'll see that things will shift as I roll. Because the IntelliQuilter doesn't know that I'm moving, I'm only looking at the head against the back wall of the machine to see that I have enough room. So I have my back and my front rollers tightened, and I can go ahead and reposition now and get started back on row 7. So I can see I'm on my last spool of thread. I'm going to need one more spool, probably just go to white, because I'm at just a hint of blue by the time I get to row 7. So I'm going to go ahead and repin the quilt, get the edges basted, and I'll go ahead and start, and we'll show you where we end up. Okay, I'm at the end of the quilt. Actually, I'm going to see if I can. You can see right here is the edge of the quilt, and my needle is right at the edge. So I'm going to go back up to the screen, and we're going to adjust. And what I'm going to do, there's a dotted line at the bottom that represents the bottom of the quilt. I'm going to touch that and activate it. It turned from blue to red, and we're going to move that all the way up to where the needle position is. I can have it go just a little bit beyond, but I don't need to waste all that thread. So I'm going to go ahead and hit finished. We are just under 2 minutes to the finish. You can see that I'm not sewing too much further than the actual bottom of the quilt. I always overestimate when I put the measurement in, and we use the snap line to bring it back up into a more accurate position. So we just have this little bit of the corner left to do. 1 minute and 2 seconds, more or less. You can see certainly down at this end of the quilt that we're on pure white Isacord thread, and we're really just getting texture here instead of color. This was just an experiment, really, just to show you kind of the difference in the value of thread and what it's going to do for the overall quilt, and just an opportunity to play with some of the values of these blue shades of thread. Less than a half a minute and we'll be finished. We can go ahead and pop this off of the frame, and we can get quilt trimmed up as well. I'm going to go ahead and trim up this quilt. This is the batting here, this is the quilt, and what I want to do is square it up, and so I'm going to use the largest square ruler that I have in my arsenal, and I have a pretty big one. You can see this is a really large ruler. This is 20.5-inch square. And what I want to do is bring the ruler into the corner of the quilt so that I'm getting the edge of the fabric on both sides lined up. And right here I've got a pretty good angle on the two sides. So I can go ahead and trim these two pieces. And I know that I have a really good square corner here. So now I can use another rotary ruler on those two edges to continue that line over. A lot of times what I'll do is put the ruler in the second corner, line up the second corner, trying to make sure that I'm more or less accurate with these. I'm going to use two rulers together. I'm butting them up like this so I can create a further extension. And now I can go ahead and line up these two rulers to make sure that I have a good square. So now I have a clean top, and I can use this clean top edge to create my vertical cuts, but I'm going to go ahead and trim this piece on the side while I'm here. I'm going to go ahead and take my long ruler and trim down the side, continuing on the straight edge that I'd created. I can do the same on this side. And when we get to the bottom, I'm going to use the big square ruler again to make sure, because I know this bottom edge is wonky. So I'm going to go ahead and line up again my ruler. And after I get that lined up, I'm going to go ahead and trim. But I know this side is a little bit higher. I'm going to butt up these two rulers and make sure that the extension is getting to where I need it to be. I just have one last side here, Going to line up the ruler in this corner with the edge, and I'm going to come around this side and trim, and it should be finished. Well, you can see the assortment of thread that I used today. We have a darker blue all the way down to a lighter blue. Actually, there's a white at the bottom. And those are the colors we use for our panto. The design was called Jessica's Twinkle, and I know that designers go to great lengths to create designs that interlock so that you can't see where they're interlocking. And you might think that I've undone that today by using different colors of thread, or in this case actually different values. But I don't really think it stands out, the delineation between the different colors. I think it's just a nice fading or ombre look. Because the design interlocks so well, the values just tend to interlock. This is a good example of what happens when you use different values of thread, and it would be a good study just for people to do so that they could see what effect they like the best. I like the way it fades from dark to light. Kind of reminds me of a starry night. But anyway, thanks for joining me today and watching as we work through this exercise or this experiment together. And I look forward to getting the binding and sleeve on this and getting it up on the wall, hopefully soon. And I guess we'll see you next time. Thanks for stopping by. Thank you for stopping by. We'll see you again sometime down the road. Time for me to